Hello, hello. Welcome to another conversation around living with spasmodic dysphonia. I am Donnell Hill, but most people call me Donnie. And with me, I have my co-host and new friend, Abigail. Abigail, do you want to tell people a little bit about who you are, and then we'll dive into your story?
Sure. So my name is Abigail and I live in Trinidad and Tobago. We kind of discussed that last week. I'm an attorney and I also have spasmodic dysphonia.
Great. Well, last week you sat with me while I shared the roller coaster that was my story and journey with SD. And now I'm excited to do that for you so people can really hear your story and everything that you've been through and overcome. So I'm going to let you dive in where you want to dive in. And if something sparks and, we need to double click on it, we'll double click on it and take the conversation there.
Sure. Well, I didn't know about SD at all. And it took me a long time to accept that something was wrong. That's a starting point. Um, I think others around me heard it before me. That was kind of my willful blindness, kind of just tuning it out. So others would often ask, "What's up with your voice? What's happening? Something's wrong. You have the cold. Is you sounding a little nervous? What's up?" And I'd be like, "Nothing." And I ain't anything, I'm not. Nothing is wrong with me. I am perfect. I'm absolutely fine. So I went through a long period of denial, like years, until about 7 years ago, I decided to go and see an ENT. And off the bat, he was like, spasmodic dysphonia. He did the test and he was like, you definitely have spasmodic dysphonia. And I thought to myself, what does that mean? So he said it, and I was like, okay, remedy wise was a solution. And he was like, well, there is no cure for SD. And my heart sank because that was the last thing that I wanted to hear. And he said it's about management, lifestyle management, managing the stress, managing how you eat, that sort of thing. And from there, it has been literally a roller coaster ride. Because as you can well imagine, I'm an attorney. Spasmodic disorder and legal work do not exactly mesh well. And in addition to that, I'm also a tutor, a legal tutor. Teaching and spasmodic dysphonia do not exactly mesh well. So I've been constantly trying to find a balance, trying to find a space where I can not only accept the diagnosis, but also move on and try to have the best quality of life possible.
There's, I think in our first conversation, one of the things we talked about was, um, what we were going through prior to the SD, or kind of when you heard your system click, or when you felt your system click. Do you mind sharing a little bit with people around like what that moment was for you and what you were going through at that time?
Sure. So I grew up in an extended family in the Caribbean. And if you know, you know. what that experience is like, right? So some people have no context for that because they grew up in a nuclear family, they grew up with mommy and daddy and siblings, and that's it. That was not the case for me. I grew up with granny, grandpa, uncle, and mom. It was that kind of situation. And that in itself, when I think about it, when I reflect on it, that dynamic in itself can be very stressful from a very young age because you do not have a separate identity. And there's really no room for you. Everything is in the collective. So you don't have preferences because we are all eating the same thing. You don't have preferences and where you want to go because we're all going to the same place, sort of thing. And on top of that, it's a super religious environment. So my grandmother is Catholic and everybody is Catholic, and we are only doing very Catholic things.
Mea culpa, mea culpa, mea culpa.
Right? It is a highly Catholic environment. And there are lots of expectations because my cousins, they are overachievers. So you are expected to follow suit. And I would have passed for my secondary school. I don't know what you all call that. If you all call it secondary school, you'll probably call it high school.
Yeah, high school and then college.
Right. So my high school would have been a convent, which is like a prestige school here. So I get into that space and don't exactly fit in. And there's that immediate friction because there's a disconnect between myself and my classmates from the outset. It's 7 years of this very strict Catholic convent school, that sort of thing. And the expectations that were at home, they transferred into the school environment. It was a lot of pressure constantly. And my grandmother and I, we had a very tight, a very close relationship. When she got ill, I didn't know what to do. So her illness was progressive. It started with a couple of strokes, minor strokes, and then it went on to full-on bleeds in her brain kind of thing, right? So there's one occasion she's hospitalized, and I go to the hospital to see her. At this time, I'm in Form 5, so I'm almost out of high school. And I see her, and she's not looking good. And I say, God, because this is a training that I have, right? This is the training that I have because they told us all the time, anything happens in life, just pray about it. And once you pray, there's going to be a solution. I believe that for a very long time. So I could not understand the concept of praying and things not going your way because that's not how we were taught. The equation, was set up. The equation was do good, pray, things will work out, kind of thing. So that's what I'm working with.
Yeah.
I go to the hospital. She is not looking well at all. And I say, God, give me half of whatever she has because the dying option is not going to work for me. So I go home. The next morning, I wake up, I have chickenpox. From the crown of my head to the sole of my feet, I'm completely covered. I am getting progressively ill. She gets better. and gets discharged. So I'm like, well, okay.
Patient worked.
Okay, good. That worked out well, good. She didn't die, good. And because I had chickenpox, she couldn't come back home because I'm contagious at this time, right? I had chickenpox so bad I had to stay out of school for 3 months. So it wasn't the normal chickenpox, it was chickenpox, chickenpox. So they sent her to my aunt's house. She got to my aunt's house, she got sick again. This time she gets hospitalized again. I recover from the chickenpox. I go to the hospital to see her. It's Valentine's Day. I'm dressed in red. I have my red flowers and I'm going into the hospital. I'm going with my aunt. So I get to the ward and I'm walking towards her little unit, her little cubicle where she is. And there's a nurse walking towards me. She's like mouthing something to me, but I don't realize she's speaking to me. So I continue to walk. So I get into the cubicle and I go up to the bed and I'm like talking, I'm like, Happy Valentine's, I bring this for you, that kind of thing. I'm having a full conversation. So I get to the side of the bed and I hold her hand. When I hold her hand, I look down and I realize I look down because it's so cold. Her hand was so cold. So I look down and I realize her hand is cold and it's also blue at the tips. I look up at her face and I realize what's happening. She is dead. I cannot explain to you what that moment did to me because as soon as I realized, the nurse gets in and she is like, no, I'm telling you to wait. You have to step outside. You have to step outside, kind of thing. And I'm like, not on planet Earth anymore. I literally felt that was the moment for me where I felt my nervous system go because I could not understand what was happening. And then my aunt, she comes into the room and she was like, Abigail, no, you have to step outside, kind of thing. That began, I think that was the start, if I could identify a moment in time where I felt my nervous system weaken. It was from that moment onwards, and that is 17. I'm 17 at that time, I had it took me years to recover from that. I I actually didn't want a relationship with God after that. I was like, this contract bad. This contract is a setup because I had doing the right thing, going to school, getting my A's, doing everything that you want me to do, and then you turn around killing people, and you still want me to come back and say prayers. I was like, absolutely not. So for about, I would say I did not have a conversation with God for about 4 years after that. Because I was so pissed. I was so upset. And I had to come to terms with the fact that having faith in God doesn't mean that everything will always go your way. And on top of that, you are a human being. You can't fix everything. Nor are you responsible for fixing everything. Because I kind of took that task upon myself to be the fix-it person. And I don't know if you know about the story of Abigail in the Bible.
I'm sure.
But it's like a helper rule, right? It's along that kind of lines. And that kind of came into my life, that theme kind of came into my life and I kind of lived that. So every situation, I'm coming up with the solution. Every situation, I'm the fix-it person kind of thing. That is not sustainable. That's not a sustainable way to live, particularly at a very young age. what I did was take all of that energy and directed it towards academia. So I just took it and put it into studying. I have a BSc in psychology, a Bachelor of Laws, a legal practice certificate. I'm a practicing attorney. I have a master's, a MBA in finance. I have a postgraduate certificate in teaching and learning. So you get the idea. I took all of that, pain and all of that, and I kind of just channeled it into education. And that's kind of how I'm in the position I am in today.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. I think there are a couple of themes that I want to pull out so you can talk about them a little more. I think one of those themes is the pressure to perform.
Yeah,
One of those themes is grief, and then the other theme is um, emotional responsibility,
yeah,
right? And I think that was kind of one of those were the themes that I saw in my own journey and kind of evolution with acceptance. And
mhm.
I'm wondering for you, how much you see those three things playing a role in the cause of the SD, like the lack of the acceptance of the SD and kind of like your day-to-day frustration with SD.
Yeah, definitely, because I think there must be some precursor to this condition. I do not think that this is a condition that just comes about naturally, and this is not with any type of medical training, right? This is just experiential.
Yeah.
But for me, there has to be some kind of shock to the nervous system, some kind of stress, some kind of overload that causes that results in SD as the outcome. That commonality, that golden thread that I've at least seen with you and I in terms of having that high pressure, coming from that high pressure background. A lot of the pressure is internalized. It isn't like I was sitting down with my sister saying every day, I feeling so pressured, you feeling pressured. It wasn't like you're growing up having that type of conversation, you know. You wasn't going to your parents and saying, oh gosh, I feeling so pressured today. It is literally an internal kind of mental thing. And I'll tell you what. So for Christmas, you have the family members coming over to have dinner. And for about 3 or 4 years, I would literally make myself absent. And I'm not talking about strangers, I'm talking about family members. I would feel so overwhelmed when they came into the house and the house just had additional, on top of the extended family, it was like extended, additional people, it would just shut me down. So my aunts and they would always be like, where's Abigail? Where's Abigail? Where's Abigail? Not knowing that this was really like a, a very designed attempt to escape this space. And that theme has kind of followed through with me in my life, where high pressured situations, and then somebody will say, well, you went to be a lawyer. High pressure situations is what that is all about, kind of thing. Yeah, I know it's odd, but you kind of get into the space where, because you internalize the pressure so much, you start to see things differently. You start to experience things differently. It's almost like a kind of, I want to call it a pseudo paranoia, because you think people are thinking things that they probably not. You feel judged when they probably not anywhere
Okay.
close to that kind of thought pattern. So definitely, I think that there's some all of those things that you mentioned, they are connected to the diagnosis.
I think well, there are actually a couple more pieces of your story I want to pull out.
Mm,
I think one is, what's it like being someone in the Caribbean living with
mm,
SD? I want to know what's it like for you to be a Black woman living with
mm,
SD and kind of the stigma that comes with that. And
mm.
then what's your experience around being a lawyer and kind of your professional life and the impact that SD has had on it. So let's start with the cultural.
Living in the Caribbean.
Yeah.
Well, the operative word would be lonely because I do not know anyone else with SD in my locality at all. I've not interacted with anyone in my space who has the condition. I have not, I've Googled support groups, have Googled chapters in the Caribbean. I've not been able to find any at all. So I think at one point in time, I thought that I was literally singular in this experience. I doubt that very much in my heart. I know that there are other people out there in the Caribbean who they have SD, but they probably don't have a platform. They probably they're not connected to any groups or anything like that. So you almost become kind of invisible with the diagnosis. That's compounded by being a younger female. I don't have the so I don't have that race context because I live in the Caribbean and I don't have that reference point, but I could tell you that when I did the research on SD, the representation did not look like me. It was very much older white women, older white men. So you're researching a condition, and while you're researching it, you are feeling the exclusion. You're feeling the exclusion because it doesn't appear like this is a condition that fits you. It doesn't appear like it's a condition that's common in your group. So then you end up thinking, well, why do I have SD then? Where did it come from? Is this hereditary? Is it something that I could pass on? Is it something that would lead to something else? Is this a precursor to Parkinson's? Is this a precursor to shingles? Like what else can come out of this diagnosis? That has been a concern for me. And professionally, like I said, being an attorney, being a lecturer, I've forced myself to stay in this space because I could have said, well, I have SD, I'm going to retire early and stay home and water my plants for the rest of my life. But I said, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to find a way to balance the two things. I'm going to find a way to be present in my professional life and still just come to terms with the diagnosis. It makes no sense really to put your head in the sand about it. It makes more sense to do the research, get connected with the right people, and kind of figure out how you're going to navigate your life while living with the condition.
One of the the memorable many memorable things you said to me in our first conversation was, um, and that you didn't want people to mistake the SD for incompetence or lack of competence.
Mm.
And I think that's such an important call out to make. And I know we're going to have a separate conversation about
Yeah.
navigating professional life, but I would love to for you to share more of your thoughts around that because I think that's something that we all kind of struggle with
Mhm.
as we're figuring out how do we make our work life work.
Mhm.
And that particular statement alone was like, oh, right, I'm an incredibly intelligent human being, but I just live with this condition. So you share your experience around that.
Well, as is a type of condition that it beats you to the race all the time. You know, it gets to the finish line before you. So you go into this space, professional or otherwise, and before you get to properly say, before you get to properly introduce yourself, the condition introduces itself first. So you are always second. And that's difficult to get accustomed to. And it's difficult to explain to people that don't have the condition. To live your life in second place because there's a condition that persistently wants to meet people first before you get to meet them. It's kind of selfish like that, you know. It's kind of selfish like that because it's going to come out first and it's going to say, "Hi, this person has SD." Now you could go ahead and talk to them. Now you could go ahead and have a conversation with them. See what you could do with them now, you know. And I try to fight that. So I will be like, no, I want to be first place. So I am trying to suppress the SD. I'm fighting with the SD and that tug of war. Others, they can't feel it. They can't feel it. They can't see it. So at the beginning of the conversation, they're like, there's a level of discomfort or anxiety or something that's happening here with this person, some kind of nervousness or something. It isn't nervousness, it's that battle that happens at the outset where you are fighting for first place with the condition. I want to introduce me. I want you to know who I am. I want you to know all my competencies. I want you to know my abilities. But I have this block in the way that might make you think otherwise. And I don't want you to think otherwise. So that's why you feel in that tension. It makes sense to me that SD is connected to muscle tension. It is a tension. It is very much kind of like dialectic forces kind of thing. It's opposing forces. There is a tension between being the version of you with SD versus being the version of you without SD. For me, I just accepted the version of me with SD. And that made it a lot easier to navigate different spaces. I know you were talking about just telling people, just telling people, hi, my name is Sunny. There's something interesting about me that you might want to know. I have SD. I didn't want to tell anyone. That was my difficulty. I didn't want to tell anyone. I I didn't want anyone to know. So, and that's probably just not the best option. When you come to terms with it, then you are able to take a hold of it. And I think naturally people begin to make a distinction between, okay, this is a very competent person who has a condition. So you take back your first place. This is a competent person who has this condition. In all the spaces that I've been in, because I've held positions of leadership with the diagnosis, and they would think like, why would they put you in a position of leadership if you have a diagnosis like SD? It's because they have been able to separate the two. They see me first, as a competent person with SD, and it comes second now.
I love that. I love it so much.
Mhm.
I think I want to take a little turn in the road because
Mhm.
you and I can laugh about it now, but when we were trying to figure it out, like it just wasn't a funny experience. But
No,
there's the shame that happens around the SD and kind of holding on to it and learning how to work with it and let it go and make peace with it, etc. And then there's the actual like physical gymnastics that we have to
yeah,
do in order to prepare for meetings or take phone calls or for you get ready for lectures.
yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about what your routine is and how it's evolved over the years?
Well, I turned to medication first. So I was looking at muscle relaxers, that kind of thing, right? Taking tablets on that spectrum because I was like doing my own arithmetic. Muscle tension in your throat equals take some muscle relaxants, and that should even that out. Um, that did not work. I I went through the period of doing things like turn into um like more natural options. So I did the whole water fasting, the detox, the meditation, the yoga, the quiet nervous system option. And I listened to a lot of don't let your mind control you, and all of these diagnoses is really your mind trying to take the forefront, and you have to be in control of your mind. I went through all of that. And even though those things help, the longevity isn't there, right? So it helps on one particular day, and then on another day, you could do 2 hours of yoga in the morning, and it does not help. I've done the lion breathing. What is that? Open up your chakra in your chakra in your throat. So you have to do like this. Is it a lion breathing or fire breathing or something that they call it? So you stick out your tongue and I've done that 4 hours. And like I'm saying, it works sometimes, and then sometimes it doesn't work. And that inconsistency, that could really affect you. That inconsistency could really play with your mind because you're thinking, well, this is something that I can adopt in the long term, and it's going to reduce the SD, but the results are so inconsistent that it can make you feel really demotivated. But for preparation for like meetings or for like lectures and stuff like that, I have to manually remove stressors from the day before.
Mhm.
So I have to, it's this condition could also give you like a kind of OCD kind of thing because in your attempt to remove stressors, you try to get everything in order. So I do the same thing every day, kind of at the same time. So when I wake up, my routine is standard because I need the place physically clean around me because clutter makes the SD worse. And that's an environmental factor. That's not like nutritional, like eating this makes it worse kind of thing, which is why I think we were discussing the mental aspect of the condition, that connection between part of this being psychological. If I feel physically closed in, if there's clutter around me, the SD gets worse. So I have to clean every day. I have to make sure that things are done in a particular way, remove all the stressors, and that puts me in the best position to have a conversation. If those stressors are there, forget it. The conversation will go downhill very quickly.
I think other people with SD would obviously experience this, but I can imagine that people who don't live with SD will
Mhm.
probably listen to this as well.
Yeah,
And there's there's a part about living with the experience where it takes such a physical and kind of emotional toll on you. Like by the end of the day, you might start talking, and then you don't want to see anybody, you don't want to talk to anybody, you don't want to open your mouth, you don't want to
yeah,
have to try and figure out which of the five ways you have to say one word or what
yeah,
sound you can make.
yeah.
So, for you, if you were to think about the physical taxation on you, like what does that look like, or what's your experience been?
I divide my days into blocks, and it helps me manage the SD because I mentally prepare for a block of time where I'm required to speak. Outside of that block of time, it's a completely different story. I do not want to speak to anyone. I don't want to have a conversation, and I'm talking about internal and external. So, like my husband, he knows that this is a quiet block. Do not bother me. Do not try to have a conversation with me. This is a rejuvenation period of 3 hours. Leave me in my corner so that I can literally recharge. Having this condition makes you stop. It forces you to stop during the day and find some way to recharge your battery. You can't do like what you're doing before, energize somebody going from morning to night. That does not work. That worsens the condition. Because you do that for one day, the next day you will not be able to speak at all. You push yourself for an entire day, the next day you cannot speak at all. So breaking up the day into blocks where it's on and off, that helps me a lot.
I don't remember whether or not I shared it in my story, but now having
Mhm.
this conversation with you, I've been thinking about it, or preparing for this conversation with you. I've been thinking about it. And the question is, what do you what do you miss about yourself pre-SD that you don't feel like you really get to experience now living with SD?
Well, I used to sing. And I used to enter into competitions and win the competitions. I was into poetry and that sort of thing, a lot of public speaking, what they will call in the Caribbean storytelling. And if I miss anything at all, it was that ability to communicate with people in a very public setting and appreciate the sound of myself. So going from that to not appreciating the song that's coming out of you is something that you have to kind of mentally reconcile because it's the same person but a different song. And you can think it's a different song than a different person. That is not the same person. You are the same person. You are literally the same person. It's just a different song that you need to come to terms with. But
Yeah,
I don't look at my trophies or anything. I have all of that packed in a box. I don't interfere with it. I actually don't like to think about it.
yeah. I I definitely get that. I think I don't really know what I miss because I remember listening to myself when I was little and we would have to play the recording back and I wouldn't enjoy hearing my voice to begin with when I was then. So that piece, but I do think there was an expressiveness and more of a lightness that I had
Yeah,
pre-SD that I've lost over the years. So
yeah.
it's always interesting to hear, and I think that'll be one of the questions that I ask people as we go forward. Um, when I don't know if you want to say a little bit about what it's been like in your experience with your family or your husband, or if you want to save that for
Mhm,
just an episode of its own or touch on it a
mhm,
little bit.
mhm,
But, I think when we're living with SD and living with people who don't have SD, like that adds a whole nother level of potential stress and frustration and like not being able to communicate with one another and
mhm.
wanting to
Yeah,
communicate with them, but you're like, I need 3 days or I
yeah,
need
yeah.
2 hours or whatever. You want to share a little bit about
Remember,
that?
I was telling you that joke that having an argument looks different because you have someone that's saying something to you and you want to respond, but the situation is so stressful that the SD acts up. So you can't respond and you're like, check my back in 2 days. But I want to tell you something. But in this moment, I'm so stressed, my voice is not working and I cannot tell you what I want to tell you. So check my back in 48 hours and I will have my response for you. It makes communicating very difficult, particularly when there's any type of emotion attached to the communication. If you are neutral, it's much easier to communicate. You add any type of anger, frustration, any kind of anxiety to the situation, and it just makes it almost impossible to communicate in the way that you want to communicate because sound is coming out, but the sound is frustrating you because that's not the way in which you want to communicate, and you don't have any control over the sound quality. You don't have any control over the reach because you can't hear from far. You cannot get into an argument from far. You have to go into total combat when you have SD. You can't be upstairs and downstairs shouting kind of thing. The person is upstairs over that balcony shouting at you, and there is no way you could shout back. You have to go up the stairs, go in front of the person and say what you have to say and then come back downstairs. So there's so many like nuances that are attached to this condition when if you can't communicate effectively internally, what are you doing externally? That's mentally difficult for anybody to come to terms with because if you cannot communicate effectively with the persons that are closest to you in the home setting, how are you going to the passport office? How are you going to the grocery? How are you having a conversation with a taxi driver? I remember sitting in a taxi and he said, I said where I was going, and he said, oh, I picked you up already. He remembered the sound of my voice. So he was like, yeah, it stays with people. He was like, yeah, I picked you up already. I know where you're going, kind of thing. And I only sat in that taxi once before. So SD definitely leaves an impression on others, and having to navigate the communication gymnastics inside and outside is a skill set that develops after a while. So for anyone that has the condition, it's rough in the beginning, very rough. But after a while, you kind of get tricks, really, and coping mechanisms that you can use to navigate different spaces.
You know, you know, if for when you ever decide to stop doing law or teaching, I think comedy could be in your future.
Yeah, maybe.
And it, and I actually think that's part of the medicine for SD is like, how do you how do you find your humor again around it,
Yeah,
especially because it can be so frustrating and painful as you're navigating it, whether you're newly diagnosed 7 years in, I've been almost 20 years in now,
yeah,
and there are days where I'm like, oh yeah, it's just a part of my experience. And then there are days where like, why is this a part of my experience? Like I just
yeah,
want it to go away. And
yeah.
it's not.
Not going anywhere.
No. Before we wrap up, is there anything else you want to share about your story?
I think when I think when you are dealt certain cards, you are dealt those cards always for your advantage. And if you view life on a whole like that, you would see those three cards and you would be like, oh, this SD was given to me for a reason. I have the opportunity to go on a platform, talk to someone, inspire others, motivate others to come out of the dark spaces that you might be in, come out of the depression that you might be in, come out of the self persecution that you may be experiencing on account of the condition, and find ways to help others. If you find ways to help others, it kind of takes this thing out of it instead of just focusing on yourself.
You're even when we were exchanging emails, you were reminding me that next Wednesday is World Voice Day. You're like, oh
Yes,
yeah,
it
we should
is.
share this with Dysphonia International. And I told you I wasn't even thinking about that. It was just kind of like I want to have these conversations with Abigail, and we'll see
Yeah,
what happens with it. And I'm really appreciative that you reminded me that this is for something much bigger than us just having a conversation. It's
yeah,
um, about reminding people that they aren't alone wherever they are in the world. It's reminding people that there are people who look like us who have this and who
yeah,
are at early stages in their career, mid stages in their career. And um, yeah, that there's some level of hope and relief and acceptance um, that we can all find as we navigate and dealing with our day to day or living with our voice disorder. So I'm really appreciative of you taking time to share your story, to give some good laughs,
no problem at all.
to
No problem at all.
bring some hope and inspiration to those who come across the video. And I'm
Yeah,
looking forward to our conversation next week.
yeah. Same. So like,
Have a good one, Abigail.
okay, Danny, bye.
Bye-bye.